incoming Vice President Kamala Harris the deciding vote. Let's get more now from a senior lecturer in US politics and policy at Queen Mary's University, Dr. Richard Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Why is this vote so important?
This vote is so important because, as you said, the control of the United States Senate is at stake. If the Democrats win these two seats, they will control both the Senate and the House of Representatives and the presidency. And that gives Joe Biden an ability to legislate, which is rare in American politics, of having all of those stars aligned. If he doesn't win both of these seats, then he won't control the Senate. And that's really significant because he'll be the first president since George H.W. Bush in 1989 not to have control of the Senate in his first 100 days. And that's really important because the Senate has to confirm all of the president's appointments to his own cabinet. So if he doesn't win these two, all of the president's appointments to his own cabinet, so if he doesn't win these two seats today, then he has to rely on Republican votes to fill his own administration.
Understood. So is it putting it too strongly to say that the outcome of this election will determine the course of Joe Biden's presidency?
Perhaps not the entire trajectory of his presidency, but it certainly will affect that very crucial sort of first 100 days period, which is often the most legislatively productive period of a president's term. They enter, they have a honeymoon, they've got that agenda that's won a mandate of the country, and then they use Congress to legislate that. But if Joe Biden doesn't have the Senate, then both his legislative agenda is in doubt, but also the whole administrative agenda, his ability to put the kinds of people he wants in the executive branch is also at stake. And then that's not even getting onto the courts, which also need Senate approval in the executive branch is also at stake. And then that's not even getting onto the courts, which also need Senate approval for Joe Biden to appoint anyone to the courts. So if, for example, a member of the Supreme Court vacated their seat, if Joe Biden didn't win these two seats today, then there's a great question mark as to whether or not he'd be able to fill their replacement.
So how close is it?
It's extremely close. Back in November, the Republican candidates got just over 49% of the vote if you put the Republican votes together. Democrats, if you look at Georgia, a good rule of thumb in Georgia politics is what's called the 30-30 rule. The Democrats need to get about 30% of the white vote, and they need African Americans to compose about 30% of voters. In November, Democrats won 28% of the white vote in Georgia, and African Americans were about 28% of the electorate. So they need to do a bit better than they did in November. Otherwise, were about 28% of the electorate. So they need to do a bit better than they did in November. Otherwise, I think it's going to be quite difficult for them to get it over the line. The polling shows, though, that it is very close, and I think that it really could be down to the wire, as they say.
We know that there's been a fairly high proportion of people who voted by post already, but I did wonder in terms of voter turnout, particularly perhaps amongst the Republicans, what impact you think, if anything, the release of that tape that we heard yesterday, which appeared to show Donald Trump in the presidential election asking an election official to find votes. What do you think?
Well, typically turnout does decrease in the second round of a runoff vote. That's perhaps not entirely surprising. There's a degree of voter fatigue, and also you don't have the pull of the presidential candidate at the top of the ticket. So I'd imagine that turnout will be lower than it was in November. The question is, will it drop more for Democrats or for Republicans relative to November? I think that my analysis would be that the Republican messaging is somewhat mixed over the last few weeks. On the one hand, the Republican message is that these are absolutely crucial elections to hold the line against Joe Biden, and in the more sort of fantastical sides of things, Joe Biden's sort of socialist agenda and so on, as they might put it. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump saying that the voting machines are are broken, that the system is corrupt, that votes have been lost or thrown away. And surely that must demotivate some Republican voters who might just think, well, why bother voting if my vote's not going to count? This is all not verified. There's no evidence that any of Trump's claims are correct. But I imagine that if Republican voters are hearing that, you could imagine some who will say, what's the point? And in such a tight election, that might make all the difference.
All eyes on Georgia. Dr. Richard Johnson from Queen Mary's University. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.